And these protests, it is fair to say, have been both peaceful and in some instances quite deadly. We saw death, we saw injuries, and in some instances we saw explosions. And we saw Russian flags. So the protests might have been forced to die down, but the fundamental issues they raised remain. No one can deny that in the last year or so, Nigerians have been forced to swallow some bitter medicine, as the Financial Times put it. Bitter medicine which has triggered the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, making everything ruinously expensive and the country's prospects more toxic than ever. Worst of all would have to be the attitude of some public officials in the face of this, who continue to extravagantly flaunt their wealth and privilege, showing little empathy for the plight of the people. So a wounded country that is still grieving, with millions of Nigerians still at their moment of greatest peril. So how might all this be resolved? Well, for his assessment of what is the biggest issue of the day in Nigeria today, I'm joined now in the studio by the 2023 presidential candidate of the Young Progressives Party, or YPP, Prince Malik Ado-Ibrahim. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
And as I said, you were the 2023 presidential candidate of a party that was dominated by young progressive people, many of whom probably took part in these protests. So I imagine that that gives you, to some extent, a front row seat. In that regard, how would you assess the mood in Nigeria at the moment following several days of protests?
Yes. Somber times, to say the least. We're a nation that is divided in so many different ways, and we haven't been able to tackle that division because of so many sort of complicated elements that came from the elections and then came from things that we've experienced in the last 15 months. Principally among this is some things that people within the government have not been able to explain out. For instance, the reason why we're experiencing the catastrophic inflation rates. We inherited a debt, or President TInubu inherited a debt of 43 odd billion. And we're sitting here trying to figure out, how do we get out of this mess? Inflation is running rampant, and the worst part of it is hunger. And we're not really understanding this nature of this complicated protest, because it didn't just combust out of nothing. There were warning signs, they were ignored. It was 30 days before this was going to happen. The government had said it was going to change or reshuffle its administration and give hope and give all these sort of wonderful things that, you know, only they pronounce, but there was no evidence of any of this. And you can only be so patient. And now you've got to the point where the hungry man is not afraid of anything else. It's not about his intellect, it's not about his faith, it's about himself. And young hunger creates violence. We're seeing it all over the world at the moment. And so we need to tackle it in a different way, with a different sort of consciousness of who we are as Nigerians.
And just on that substantive issue of the protests, I mean, you mentioned the cost of living crisis, which is evident for everyone to see. I mean, prices rising, 40%, wages not keeping up at all. But as someone pointed out, it's not just the poor, ordinary masses who are angry, is it? I mean, one public policy analyst said there was an interclass angst. In other words, the middle class, the working class, and the lower class, all of them united in the fact that they can no longer afford to live as they used to.
And critically amongst this is that the government has not enunciated its plans. What are we doing to alleviate this? There have been a lot of promises not met. This way you have described these various class sectors within the government, it also has a divide north and south. The south has peculiarities to it. We're looking at the subsidies, it's affecting transportation and movement. In the north, it's not the same thing. They're united because of hunger. And that hunger is really where this fire is burning most.
It's a much more fundamental thing,
isn't
it?
Horribly fundamental, because we've this administration hasn't kind of looked at this thing in a very black and white way. Northern Nigeria has been mismanaged, not just under this administration. This administration inherited all the problems that we've seen since 1999. Progressively, they have gotten worse. The leaders that were elected by the people of the northern states have done nothing. I mean, there's no way to describe what they're doing. And now you've got to a point where hunger has met violence. And violence is the only way I'm going to be able to let you know I'm feeling this pain. The northern Nigerian is different from the southern Nigerian. And it's critical for us to fundamentally understand this. A northerner has very simple needs. He wants to farm. He's a sustenance farmer. He wants to be able to pray 5 times a day or worship his God. He wants to be able to go to the next village and mix with relatives and go to weddings and all those things. And since 2015, that has not been able to happen. They are now refugees in their own part of the country. They are being fed things that they don't really want to eat. They're in IDP camps. They can't farm. Now, once you've taken all that away from somebody, and now you make him hungry, he has nothing else to do but to revolt. And the governors have bigger point of blame than the federal government.
Right.
And the federal government needs to be enunciating that, saying, listen, I didn't vote for these governors. You voted for them. My job is federally. I'm the Nkesi of Nigeria. And more importantly, we're not giving results. We're not saying what we're going to do. I watched the other day a governor bringing out wheelbarrows and shovels. And I'm like, you're protesting, you're bringing out wheelbarrows and shovels, and you're proud of the fact that you're doing this in a state that is horribly populated by angry youth. What is a wheelbarrow and a shovel going to do? Help pick up the damage from the riots?
So what would you like to see? What would make you feel reassured?
Well, from a fundamental part of where I see Nigeria right now, I need to see action. I need to see something happening. Don't just give me rhetoric. Just be patient. Things will happen. Federally, we need to be able to put some action behind it. Move personnel. Ministers that are not performing, show the public that you're actually understanding that there is a fundamental problem with the way leadership is happening in the country. They are not leading. They're there with the pomp and ceremony of office. But you can't really give me 80% pass mark in any of the ministries. I'll give you one that is shocking. You have this Russian flag that we're seeing. We're not really understanding where that is coming from. When this
I was going to come to that, but now that you've brought it up, let's get to it.
This administration came in with a lot of hope from a lot of people. And unfortunately, we got into the problems of Niger. And we made a fundamental error. Our forefathers had concentric circles. Nigeria understood that its neighbors were the most important first layer of that circle. Niger, Chad, Cameroon. Don't mess with them. They are your protection. That's what stops your enemy from the north coming down to you. By all means, our forefathers prepared us by providing electricity to Niger, by promising that they would not dam the River Niger from the top. We prepared ourselves. Those borders are intermingled with Nigerians and Nigerians. And then what happens? The foreign policy went awry. Niger had its problem with the coup. Instead of getting the administration there to get to democracy in a fine way, timelines, we decided to be harsh and mean and cut off electricity and close the borders. The French were let out. The military was there. Nigeria made all these threats and everything, and then nothing happened. Now, those leaders look like powerful men. They've defied the West. They defied Nigeria. And what came in there? The Russians. Russian flags were being flown then. And that's your enemy at your border. Now you have a problem. Your enemy is looking at you going, I'm going to show you.
But when you say enemy, I mean, when you look at that issue of the waving of sort of Russian flags, do you suspect any involvement from Moscow?
Not
or
at
do
all.
you agree with the administration when it says that mischief-making Nigerians are behind it?
It's easy to
Or do you think it might have come from across the border?
Certainly, I think part of it is from across the border. You have an enemy at your border. And it's not an enemy because he wants to hurt you, but you have hurt him.
Yeah.
And he sees you hurting, and he's going to put some pressure on you. And during those days, the Russian flag was being flown.
Taking advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so that ideal, and they're shouting they want the military back and all that. Look, President Bola Tinubu has a fundamental problem he must solve, and his foreign policy advisors have failed us and have failed him, because now he's got his second presidency at ECOWAS. He needs to mend that fence. We need to go back to our traditional idea of our neighbor being our first circle of concentric protection before ECOWAS, and we must make peace with the Nigerians. That's first. Now, that allows us a protection that farming can happen properly. We had the multinational joint task force with Cameroon, Chad, Niger, protecting us during that era. That is at risk because Niger is not there anymore. All the things that were happening are now a consequence, a part of the consequence of what we're seeing now. You add hunger to that, and that is it's
a combustible thing, isn't it?
And we can't, pour anything on it, but hope and visible optics of leadership. I'm going to come. Even if you have to do some drastic measures, if you have to borrow to feed. Show sympathy, show empathy.
Yeah.
Put people in a place where you are showing that, look, these guys have failed you and I'm changing my administrative board. These are the elements of leadership that I would like to see. I mean, I'm not in office, but as somebody who's looking at and loves this country, and I know my president is there for the next 3 years, I want to see him fail. I want to see him succeed.
Yeah, but I mean, you're a member of, in a manner of speaking, you're a member of the opposition. And in terms of who the administration is blaming for the protests, some of them have rooted their statement in political ideology, calling it opposition-driven. Would you agree or disagree with that characterization?
Not at all.
Or you think it simplifies it?
It's convenient to use those terms. Look, the global problem today is not just a Nigerian issue. It's in England, it's in France, it's everywhere. There's something. There's an antagonism to government at the moment, and we have to placate. We have to show sympathy to the people who we rule over. We cannot be gods. Governors, look, until our constitution allows us to be able to prosecute governors properly, they are 8-year gods. And once they come out, finding them is hell. There is no checks and balances that have been put in place so that people can feel that they are part of the solution that we must have here. So I'm really worried that we're sitting in a time bomb that is happening of itself, and we haven't found ways in which to quell that problem.
And earlier we had, just returning to that issue, because I think you made a very important point around that issue of the Russian flags, and the fact that we really ought to be looking closely at our neighbors sort of at the northern border. And earlier we heard the Army Chief of Staff saying that it was an act of treason and a capital offense to fly any foreign flag. That sounds a bit draconian. And of course some people have been arrested for waving those sort of Russian flags that we saw. I mean, are you concerned about the penalty they could face?
If that penalty is imposed, then they have to come to this hotel with all the flags flying out here and arrest everybody in here. Look, we're coming heavy-handed. These are not literate people. These are people who are look at symbols, and they're seeing that these symbols are antagonizing government, and they will continue to use them. We must find a way to make these people feel as if they're part of Nigeria and not some element of difference. That they don't feel government. Government is not touching the northerner. He's not touching the northerner at all. And so he feels that he's in a position to
but it's not unique to this government, though. I mean, some have said that this country has been dominated by northern governments, and so they have to be held to account, particularly by their people, for the fact that they've not been touched by government.
It's a convenient thing. Yes, leadership in the North has failed the North, but we're in a federal. I'm a Nigerian. I'm not a Northerner. I'm not a Southerner. I'm a Nigerian. So what affects the North is going to affect me in the South or in the middle where I'm from. What we need to do is try to find a way to be able to help everybody in the country. Look, everything that's supposedly good in this country is coming from the South. Whether it's electricity or industry, it's all coming from the South. What is the North's contribution? It's supposed to be farming and food. They can't do that. So we're feeling the pinch of hunger. We're feeling the pinch of destitution and desperation. And there's no way other than to vent that with violence, because you will hear me. Now, we need to be able to find a way in which dialogue is met. The president must reach out. If your opponents are saying that it's political, then I tell you what, best thing to do is bring them into some kind of unity in which they can go out and reach. Look, failing Nigeria by 2027 is not something any good leader wants to inherit. That is asinine, that is silly. We need to be able to figure out, how do we get this country to work together? How do we, as Nigerians, figure out how we're going to work together?
And what signs are you seeing? I mean, when you look at Nigeria going forward, how much daylight are you seeing? Do you see a country with some light streaking through, or do you see a country on the precipice at this material moment?
I think we're too big to fail. I think that the government has to find a way in which it can survive the next 3 years without being a lame duck government. I'm not saying that anything can happen. I'm certainly one that believes in democracy, and we have to go through the rule of law. The protesters, look, 28 million people voted during this election out of a possible 90-odd million people. 28 million. Roughly 29% of the population voted. Those are the owners of Nigeria. And you go and protest and you shout in the street, did you vote? And if you didn't vote, prepare yourself to vote in 2027. Because that's the only legal way, the only sane way, the only democratic way to make things different. And then pick the people who you want to lead, because right now, even in the pool of people, choices are very, very few. I don't believe that anybody who has been in government, any form of government over the last 15 years, has anything that can offer Nigeria come 2027. We need to reevaluate who and what we are. We need to have a direction, somebody who's going to be able to tell us what vision he sees for Nigeria.
So that could be a political opportunity for you, then? It's
a political opportunity for any young Nigerian that feels that they love this country and want to see good. We're not trying to ruin what our forefathers and our true Nigerian core is. We've lost a lot of the meaning of what Nigeria. Look at the Olympics, we haven't done anything.
But the point you're making basically is that, I mean, to put it in a nutshell, is that President TInubu is unable to essentially craft the right political strategy at this point going forward, and that has been made more apparent by the way that they've handled these protests.
If I wanted to put that in my own nutshell, I would say the president is the president of the country. The choices he has made to be his advisors and his administrators have failed him woefully. This is a time to make some brave moves. I would disperse and remove everything that was part of the last administration that you're still holding.
Right.
I would create an opportunity for fresh minds to come into this administration. This is the time to do it. You've got 3 years to go. Show Nigerians that you feel their pain, and you're going to do some changes. Look, change is better than doing nothing. At least you have an opportunity.
Absolutely. And talking about bold moves, I mean, some say that there is a need to reframe the debate, that it's not just about the cost of living crisis and some of the protests and the thuggery that we've seen at those protests, but it's about the appalling ethnic baiting and the phobia towards some ethnic groups. I mean, do you think the debate needs to be reframed in that direction, because it's important for those maligned groups to see Nigerian politicians speaking to that, and those who feel hurt to see Nigerian political leaders speaking up for them and really trying to understand the realities of their fears? I mean, is that also an essential part of this new approach that you're talking about?
Well, we have some sore losers in politics, and they will take any red meat to be able to make this administration look bad. I don't agree. I think we should put their feet to fire, but I don't think we're in a position to start trying to malign the nation, because whatever you throw at the president will stick on the citizenry of this country. Now, the approach we must have now is, part of the problem, the winner takes all. And it's hard to be up there and think you can, they're not going to dictate to me, I'm the boss, I'm the king, and the people beside you are not telling you that you're naked. The people beside you are not telling you that you failed. This is not Lagos, this is smaller. Mr. President, reach out, touch some of the people that can bring some intellect and technical know-how into this administration before we all fall foul of what is a great country with potential. We're still looking at oil when we've got other things like lithium and gold. There are so many incredible things we can do with the assets we have that can generate tremendous income for this country, and we're still looking at what we've done in the past.
I mean, every time I listen to you, I detect this sense of tremendous frustration, because I mean, you've been at the UN, you've been global, you've done so many things internationally, and it must be just so frustrating and limiting to have all that experience and not be able to kind of bring it to bear in this country.
You can't even bring it to the attention of people, or there are not many opportunities to be able to bring ideas to the fore. So what you do is you sit there and you watch, and then just shake your head and say, well, maybe. But the political elite do not want new blood. They like it the way it is. What we need is an infusion of visionary Nigerians. There are many, many souls, men and women, young, exposed, well-traveled, technocrats like myself, that can bring a lot to the development of this country, whether it's in this administration or in the next one. But you have to reach out. You have to, the President was saying he wants a dialogue. Who are you dialoguing with? Who are you going to talk to? You have to pay a toll to be able to even see a minister today. More or less, even the people within the administration complaining that they cannot see their own president. In the ivory tower, you see very little. Those at the bottom are waiting to take that ivory tower down. Come down, talk to the people. You will get results. He did this when he was in Lagos. He did this when he was in opposition. Now, the foot has the ball to it. Everybody's going to want to tackle you. And I really believe that if our president in the next few months realizes that this is a moment, that tunnel that you're saying, is it light or is it a train coming? That is what we have to figure out in the next couple of months.
Well,
otherwise, Nigeria.
Some would wager that it's the headlamps of an oncoming train.
Well, if it's a Nigerian train, it's not going anywhere. It's probably stuck on the tracks. But we need to get things moving again, and we need dialogue. We need to give hope a chance. We need to be able to say to people, look, this is going to happen. Don't just tell me it's going to happen. Tell me what is going to happen. In 6 months, there will be food. In 3 months, there'll be this. And make it clear that there is something. There are plans that a lot of us in this group we have called Reset Nigeria, it's just talking about what can we do differently. And the fundamental thing everybody says is we got to get back to farming. One of the biggest skill sets we have in this country is the military of this country. They're well trained. They go for 30 odd years, and then we just throw them out like chaff. Those are very well skilled people that you can bring into engineering, into farming. The Nigerian military should have its own farmland, because once they do that, they're going to bring security. And if you've got elements like the Civil Defense Corps, I would put them out into the farmland and make sure that they give those farmers an opportunity to grow Nigerian food for Nigerian people. This should be the government of the people. This is a time for you to be bold and make something really crazy happen, that the people say, yes, my president has heard me, and I'm really proud to be a Nigerian, and we need to wear that flag again.
Very interesting talking to you, and always very interesting getting a sense of your thoughts and the ideas that you've got. Prince Malik Ado-Ibrahim is the 2023 presidential candidate of the Young Progressives Party. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Charles.